And then I think we'll start with some introductions to the team. Dr. Rabi.
Hi, my name is Kari Rabi. I'm a family practice and addiction medicine physician here at NACC, and I work in the MAT program.
Michelle.
Hi, I'm Michelle Corcoran. I'm the nurse manager for the MAT program at NACC. Welcome.
Nikki.
Hi, I'm Nikki Jardina. I'm the infectious disease nurse at NACC.
And Tina.
My name is Tina. I am the harm reduction supervisor here at NACC.
And I'm Lindsay. I'm the community and tribal engagement specialist at NACC. And Renee, do you mind introducing yourself again for us?
Sure. I'm Renee Bolio-Banks. I'm an elder in residence at the Native American Community Clinic. Been here for about 4 years. I offer spiritual care. Welcome. Thank you.
Thank you. And we'll start with some announcements here. I'm just going to share my screen. So welcome today to the Midwest Tribal Echo, everybody. We're the opioid use disorder education and treatment series. Today we have Anna Hall, who is a criminal defense attorney from the Legal Rights Center, talking about the rights and risks of Steve's Law. So we're the Native American Community Clinic. We were established in 2003. We're an FQHC and we're located in the heart of the South Minneapolis urban indigenous community. This is a list of all the services that we offer, from primary care to dental. We have an intensive outpatient treatment program and many harm reduction services. This is a list of our current job openings. We have behavioral health therapist, registered nurse, family practice provider, staff accountant, medical assistant, registered nurse, chemical health coordinator, research project coordinator, medical scribe, human resources manager, registration float, and licensed practical nurse. And then that's our website there. So if you go onto our website and click jobs, you can read more about those job descriptions. Session guidelines, please know protected health information. If you could keep yourself muted if you're not speaking. Please let us know who you are in the chat if you would, so that I can make sure to send everyone the post survey evaluation. And then we always welcome you to put questions in the chat or comments. And then some upcoming echoes. Our next echo will be May 17th with Brianna Matrius from the U of M. She's going to be talking about healing through history. And then on June 7th, we will have Tina Monnier and James Schmidt from NACC talk about harm reduction. And then this is kind of a save the date. So June 27th through the 29th, Seven Directions from the University of Washington is holding a conference at Mystic Lake, which our ECHO team will be there to facilitate interactive naloxone trainings. So if you want any more information on attending that, please let me know. This is a list of other echoes that we recommend. Indian Country Echo, there is a harm reduction echo that's, they do that on the first Tuesday of every month, and they're on the West Coast, so it's 12 p.m. Pacific time, 2 p.m. Central time. So definitely check that out. Let me know if you want any more information in the chat, or you can always email me. We do offer CE credits. So it's important if you can fill out that post-evaluation survey, you'll receive that credit. So if you can let me know who you are in the chat, that would be great. And then case presentations, we always welcome them. It's a great, make great for discussion. Please let me know if you have something to share. And then with that, I will stop sharing my screen and welcome Anna. Thank you for being here.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for having me. I'm just going to pull up my PowerPoint quickly. Are you seeing the slides? Awesome. Great. Well, thank you so much for having me. My name is Anna Hall. I use she, her pronouns. I am a criminal defense attorney at the Legal Rights Center in Minneapolis. I'm going to start by just telling you a little bit about the Legal Rights Center if you're not familiar with us. We were founded in 1970, and we were founded by folks from the Way in North Minneapolis and members of the American Indian movement. And the idea when we were founded was to create an organization that would, really zealously represent the interests of the Native American and Black communities in Minneapolis and in Minnesota more broadly. To this day, that's still what we do, although we've expanded, as immigrant populations have shifted in Minnesota. But we are really out in community, trying to make sure that we're listening to the community and representing the interests of the communities of color and criminalized communities in the cities. So some of our work is we represent adults and juveniles with criminal charges in Hennepin County. And so, if folks come into contact with people who are looking for legal representation on criminal charges, they can reach out to the Legal Rights Center. We are an alternative to the public defender's office. And so people who would qualify for a public defender qualify for our services as well. And we have community advocates who do a lot of the sort of front-facing work, interact with clients, and do our intakes. Our Native American community advocate is named Ed Yellowhammer. He wanted to be here today, but he had a family emergency, so he couldn't, unfortunately. But I'll have his contact information at the end of the slide, at the end of the presentation, and he's a great person to reach out to if somebody is looking for legal resources, whether they're criminal or something else that we don't offer but can refer out to. We also have a team that offers restorative practices work. They go into schools predominantly and support students and families who are dealing with issues in schools, whether disciplinary issues or other concerns, and support those students through restorative processes to make schooling less punitive for our youth. We do advocacy both for youth and on other issues at the legislature. So policy change around bail reform, pretrial justice, the conditions for young people who are incarcerated, and other issues, and then community education. So I've done some talks on Steve's Law, and I'm excited to be here and chat with you a little bit about that. So Steve's Law, most of you do harm reduction work. I'm sure you've heard of it if you're in Minnesota. Steve's Law is a Good Samaritan law. And what it does essentially is provide some protections to bystanders, and it encourages them to help in a crisis situation. Specifically for Steve's Law, that's a situation where someone is either overdosing or dealing with a suspected overdose. So Steve's Law provides certain legal immunities to people calling 911 for help with an overdose. We're going to talk about, what the limitations of the law are as well, but we're going to, focus on kind of the legal issues at hand here. And then Steve's Law also expands access to naloxone. So I just want to start by acknowledging that this statute is really tough to talk about because it's kind of full of holes. And so the very clear protections that are really accessible to members of the community are few, and there's a lot more sort of like risks or like things to watch out for. And I know that can be frustrating when I'm talking about it. My goal in this presentation is to give you the best legal information possible, with the understanding that there's a lot of like practical things that happen in the moment when someone may be experiencing an overdose that makes this kind of advice difficult to implement. And I'm going to talk a little bit about some sort of like very clear things that you can keep in mind near the end. I also want to say that, the dealing with police is always difficult. They are often acting outside of the bounds of the law or the Constitution. And so, what the protections I'm about to explain are sort of in an ideal world, here's what I would recommend. And then also like recognizing that we don't always live in that world and that the people we're working with are often dealing with difficult law enforcement interactions. This is the best advice I can give within the legal system that exists. So the first and most important right that you probably all know is that naloxone is legal to carry and it is legal to use if you suspect that someone is experiencing an overdose. The reason I put this at the front end is I started doing these presentations because Southside Harm Reduction Services came to us and said, people are being hassled by cops for carrying naloxone. Is it legal to carry naloxone? It's making participants not want to take Narcan kits. And so I just want to be really clear, cops have no basis for hassling people on that. It is always legal to carry naloxone and it is legal to use it as well. The other very clear protection in Steve's law is that a lot of the protections that are in there are mainly for the person experiencing an overdose and the person who called 911 first. So Steve's law doesn't protect everyone on the scene. It really protects those two people. So if you're the person that calls 911 or the person overdosing, you cannot be charged for use or possession of small amounts of certain drugs. So say, I call 911 for my friend and the cops show up and in the midst of the medical intervention, they end up having to remove clothes and they find a small baggie of marijuana. That Steve's law protects them from criminal charges for possession of that small amount. So less than 3 grams of heroin, cocaine, and meth, less than 10 grams of other narcotics. And then this is kind of the funny one because it's not actually that small, less than 10 kilograms of marijuana. Those cannot be charged if they're found on your person when cops are responding to an overdose call. And I'm sorry, I'm not monitoring the chat. So if there end up being, feel free to ask questions throughout, but if there end up being questions, maybe someone hop in and let me know.
I have a question, a couple questions.
Yeah.
First is some of our patients have expressed, said they've gotten into trouble for having the needles, if you have injectable Narcan. And then the other question is that 10 grams of fentanyl as well?
So I'm going to answer your second question first. Yes, the fentanyl would fall under other narcotics. As far as the needles go, I am going to get to that a little bit later, but the basic answer is that needles on their own are not inherently drug paraphernalia. And so cops really shouldn't be hassling people for the sole possession of needles either. But I can go into a little bit more detail about that in just a second.
Thank you.
So the next protection, if you call 911 or you're the person overdosing, is that you cannot be charged for drug paraphernalia like needles or pipes. So again, same scenario, cops search you or something falls out of your pants while they're administering Narcan, whatever. If it's drug paraphernalia, that also cannot be charged as a crime under Steve's law. Lots of people are concerned that hey, I don't have anything on me, but I am dealing with this other case right now where I just got out on probation. Is this going to impact that? You can't have your pretrial release or probation, parole revoked for either of the previous two things. So small possession amounts or drug paraphernalia, it's not going to impact those things either. It could, in theory, there's a lot of sort of middle ground with probation, especially of you might have a probation violation and the terms of your probation might change as a result of this, but revocation is not going to. So that's all of the major, very clear protections of Steve's Law. And I wish there were more. And I think folks are working on having the law expanded a little bit. It was a law that was passed after many, many compromises. And so there aren't as many protections as there are sort of risks to watch out for. The biggest one that I like to talk to people about is that bystanders can be charged with any crime. And so a bystander is anyone other than the person who called 911 and the person experiencing the overdose. So if there's a crowd gathered around, those people do not have any protections under Steve's Law. Again, you know, it's not immediate that a bystander would necessarily get charges, right? Like cops shouldn't be showing up to the scene and searching everyone on scene and saying, you know, let me see what's in your pockets. That being said, we know that law enforcement can sometimes do things outside of what they should be doing. And so, you know, the protections that are offered to the person calling 911 are not offered to others. And then anyone at the scene of the overdose, so that includes the person experiencing the overdose and the person who called 911, can be charged for large amounts of drugs, so amounts bigger than what was on the other slide. Buying or selling drugs, and this gets into some tricky territory. I mentioned earlier that use and possession can't be charged, but the law does not protect people for purchasing or for selling drugs. And so what that means is that if police start asking questions about where'd you get your drugs, you know, who'd you buy them from, that can get risky and get into like someone could potentially be charged for buying and selling. And I'll talk about some kind of advice and protections at the end. And then criminal activity unrelated to the overdose. So if you know, a cop shows up on the scene and they run someone's name and they find that they have an open warrant, or they witness an assault, or they see that someone is carrying a gun and they find that that person is not legally carrying the gun, those things are not protected either. So it's really keeping the protection super, super narrow to things related to the overdose, drug possession, and paraphernalia possession. If you call 911, Steve's Law technically only protects you if you stay on the scene and cooperate with police. This is a tricky piece of the law because the law doesn't really define what cooperating means. And cooperating with police can be really risky for lots of people, particularly people who are maybe unhoused or who are Indigenous or Black. So we're not clear, but my advice is to answer questions only that help treat the overdosing person. The point of Steve's Law is to save lives. It is not meant to help investigate crimes. And so to fulfill the purpose of Steve's Law, to cooperate, you know, within the realm of Steve's Law would be answering questions like what drugs someone took or how much. Again, not where they got it from, not who sold it to them, really just focusing on what's necessary to treat that person. I'm going to skip that. So I know I ran really quickly through those things before I talk about how we can protect ourselves, and maybe there is, you know, questions that are related to that, but any questions about what I've talked about so far, and I'm happy to go back to slides too. Okay. So the best course of action for a bystander, so not the person who called 911, but anyone else, is to leave the scene of the overdose if possible. Obviously, this is a piece of advice that is like legal, not human. There are lots of reasons you might need to stay on the scene. It's someone you love, you're helping keep them alive, you live in, you know, the space where the overdose is occurring. All of those are totally valid human real life reasons. From a legal perspective, staying on the scene when cops are going to show up puts you at legal risk. So if it's not strictly necessary for you to be there for either like emotional or health reasons, I would advise leaving at least until it's clear that police have left or are not coming at all. If you decide that you need to stay on the scene for any of those reasons, or if you're sort of trying to decide, some of the questions that you can think about are things like, do I know I have a court case open? Do I know I have a warrant? Maybe I didn't show up for a hearing and I'm aware of that. Is there anything on me that could lead to my arrest? Again, cops shouldn't just be searching everyone on the scene. They don't have legal cause to do that. That being said, cops will sometimes do that. Safer to not be there if you have things on you that you know you shouldn't be possessing. Personal question about whether you feel safe interacting with police or being in proximity to police. And then again, is it necessary for me to be here to keep the overdosing person safe, or do others seem to have that under control? Do not talk to the police or answer questions about buying, selling, or sharing drugs. I talked about this a little already. Answers like I don't know is an acceptable answer if you genuinely don't know. You don't have to come up with an answer. I'm not going to answer any questions is also a good answer. Again, questions about you. If you're the person calling 911 or if you're a bystander, the police shouldn't need to be asking you anything about yourself, your drug use, your activities. Their focus should be on the person experiencing the overdose, and they shouldn't need to be asking other questions. And they don't need that information in order to do what they were called to the scene to do, which is to assist the person experiencing the overdose. And remember, this is general, this is not Steve's Law. You never have to talk to the police. In Minnesota, you do have to identify yourself to them, and so that can get tricky with warrants. But if police stop you and you don't want to talk to them, if you're trying to leave the scene and you don't want to be there, questions like, can I go? Do I have to stay? Can I leave? Are good questions that force the police to decide in that moment whether they're going to detain you or not. If they tell you you're not able to leave, that means you are being detained and constitutional protections kick in at that point. So oftentimes they won't want that to happen and they'll sort of hedge and, just sort of ignore your question. If they ignore your question, then you can stop answering questions and say, I'm not going to say anything and I want to talk to a lawyer before I do. If they tell you you are free to leave, then leave. But you never.
Sorry, I have a quick question about that. So if you're the person responding to the overdose, then can you, I'm sorry, maybe you just answered this and I missed it, but can you refuse to give your name then to them so they can't check for warrants or?
Yeah, so I mean, if you, in theory, you could call 911 and decline to give your name on the phone. But if officers show up to the scene and they ask you for to identify yourself to them, you are required to do that.
I see, okay.
Was there another question? Okay. This maybe is obvious. This kind of goes back to what I said already. Possessing drugs or weapons when you don't have a permit or otherwise prohibited from possessing weapons, try not to have that if you know that police are responding. Even if you're staying on the scene and you decide, police are coming, if you can put them down or hand them off to someone that is allowed to possess them, that would be better. And then never consent to a search. Best things as a lawyer that I can see when I'm looking back at an interaction between an officer and a suspect, a person who's being accused, is that the person said, I don't want you to search me. If you give permission to search, it doesn't matter whether the cops ever had any other reason to search you, they now have enough reason. If you've given your permission, that's it. So if police are asking to search you, I don't consent to a search, you can't search me, you don't have my permission. If they're asking, it's a good bet that they don't actually have legal cause to search you. And so that should, that should signal to you, oh, I'm being asked. That means they wouldn't be able to do it without me saying yes. So always refusing to be searched. That doesn't always mean that the cops are going to listen to you, or they're going to say, oh, okay, you don't want me to, I won't. But it does help later on for your lawyer. And then this is related to the needles. I advise keeping naloxone and needles in the same bag or the same kit unless like actively using them. And this goes to the question about, getting hassled for carrying needles. It's a lot harder for cops to show that they had a good reason to hassle you if it's like a needle next to naloxone and that those are there for, the needles are there to administer naloxone. Even if the needle is separate from the naloxone, from a legal standpoint, a court still has to decide that the needle was intended to be used as drug paraphernalia. So if it's a clean needle, that's a lot harder to show. So, to the extent that people who get naloxone kits can keep the needles, not use them for other things, keep them with the naloxone, that is the best way to prevent either getting hassled or ultimately convicted for a drug paraphernalia charge. So I covered a lot. My head's always spinning after I do this presentation. So I just wanted to say, like, in short, if you don't have to be there, don't be there when the cops show up. If you do have to be there, say as little as possible to police. Never consent to a search, never admit to buying or selling drugs, and keep the focus on saving the person's life. Keep the focus on what Steve's Law is for, which is to keep people alive when they're experiencing an overdose. And then this is my contact information, my email address. This is Ed's email address. He's a good sort of first line of contact at Legal Rights Center. If you have someone who's looking for legal services, if you have questions about Steve's Law, feel free to reach out to me. And Lindsay has these slides, so feel free to send them out or send on my email if people need that. And I'm happy to answer any questions about Steve's Law or more general questions about criminal law if folks have interest in that.
Thank you, Anna. Yeah, I can definitely send out the slides, and if anyone has any questions. Does anyone have any comments or questions for Anna?
I've got a question. I'm curious. So our team, we do, the harm reduction team does street outreach, similar to Southside Harm Reduction, who we work with closely. We hand out a lot of supplies, and we hear the same complaints. And what we've kind of been toying with is like producing like inserts that we can put into our kits or stickers that we can put on the outside that sort of give participants talking points, or if they don't want to talk, they can just like show officers on their kit that like it's, just something like it's legal for me to have this. And then even just like really basic flyers to give people with kind of like the 101 that you just gave us. Like if a cop asks you if they can search you, you can just say no. Do you guys have content like that? Or is that something that anyone at the Legal Rights Center would be interested in like consulting with us on?
Yeah, so I did develop a trifold, I guess it's more like a little square, just like that a while back. And I haven't gone back and looked at it recently. My instinct, I tried to make it not lawyery, but I'm sure it's too lawyery. And I did work with Southside a little bit on language, but I'd be happy to send it to you and get your feedback and sort of adjust it based on what you think is useful and not. I think Southside's idea, and I don't know if they've done this with it yet, was to print it out and put it in kits.
Okay, yeah,
So that's definitely something that I would be happy to work with you on if you want to take a look at what I have so far.
that would be great. Thank you.
I know that our trifold overdose response thing that we had a while ago did have one of the pages had some like Steve's Law, Good Samaritan stuff on it.
Yeah. Okay.
I should pull that out and see what was on
Yeah,
that.
yeah, let's pull it out.
We have a question, Valerie, unrelated, but does anyone know if the rapid response xylazine test strips are going to be available here anytime soon?
I think they are on the market.
They are available.
Yeah, let me see if I can dig up a link here.
They're the same brand as the fentanyl test strips.
Yeah, the whatever BTX on it.
Deanna, I have a question, which I've asked and I still am not quite sure. Do you know anything more on how this law applies to like tribal reservations? If it's up to each nation to decide whether or not, or do you know anything more about that?
Yeah, so I think I had someone look into this after you asked that several months ago at the other presentation. And let me just pull up my research really quick. I think what I remember is that there should really be no difference. With the exception of Red Lake, which has different requirements around when federal and state laws apply. All of the reservations in Minnesota are subject to the same criminal laws as anywhere else. And so they would be also protected by Steve's Law. They would be subject to the same protections that Steve's Law provides. But let me just see if I have this research. I don't have, I know that I looked into this and wrote something up about it. I can't remember where I have it saved right now, but I can check again and send you an answer. Lindsay might, but you know, in general, the criminal laws apply on the reservations just like they apply off. And Steve's Law is not a criminal law. It's a like civil protection. It's an immunity, but those same immunities should exist anywhere that the criminal laws apply.
Great, thank you. I appreciate the information.
I have another question. What would you advise we tell people to do if they feel like their rights have been violated around Steve's Law? Like that there was a prior situation where they feel like they didn't get that immunity that they were supposed to have got.
Yeah, that's a good question. I mean, it kind of depends on what played out, right? Like the Steve's Law only kicks in some ways it's only relevant, like it's not as relevant on the scene necessarily. I mean, police should not be making arrests in these situations either, but they sometimes will. Often it'll come down to a lawyer looking at a case and saying, you know, knowing Steve's Law and being aware of that. If somebody had a lawyer that didn't present that defense for them, that, you know, is potentially an ineffective assistance claim. You know, if they were convicted of something and they didn't receive advice on the Steve's Law immunities, we don't do like post-conviction work at the Legal Rights Center, but they could try to contact the state appellate public defender's office. If it's a situation where it didn't result in a court case, which is often, I think, what has been happening is like, as lawyers, we're not seeing it because it's really just like the cop to participant interaction that is playing out in a messy way, but then there's no ultimate charge. And so a defense attorney and a prosecutor don't really come into play. That is more on like the civil rights side of things. In terms of like a, a legal method for resolving that. I would be really interested in hearing from participants, like continuing to hear from participants about whether they're dealing with these issues, if they're still getting hassle on carrying naloxone, if they're still getting hassle on needles, if they're getting searched every time a cop sees them with a naloxone kit. That's the kind of information that like you all would have better access to than I would, because I'm really only seeing things that ultimately get charged. I do know, like through our work with Southside Harm Reduction, I ended up speaking with multiple public defenders who were not aware that naloxone is legal to carry. And so they had clients who were being charged with naloxone possession. And that because the Hennepin County, the prosecutors also didn't know. And they needed to be educated on that. I know that someone from the Steve Remler Hope Network spoke with Hennepin County attorneys about it. So there's sort of like background stuff that we could do if you're continuing to hear from participants that this is an issue. Legal Rights Center would love to support that, to facilitate conversations with prosecutors if that's helpful. But also, police are often the ones doing this stuff. And so, I guess that's a long way to say like tracking what's going on, having people tell you so that you can tell us or coordinate with Southside or tell Steve Remler Hope Network. Those are the ways that I can think of to kind of be tracking this and be responsive to it. Does that answer your question?
Yeah.
I'm curious, this is kind of getting into the weeds a little bit, but I'm curious in cases, because I'm sure there are situations in which a police officer maybe is supposed to ask, can I search you, but frames it more as like a demand. And so in situations like that, where people are made to feel like there is like probable cause or whatever, how can people still not consent without maybe knowing whether or not they are allowed to say no?
Yeah, I mean, I think that the easiest answer is like you should say no every time. A person, I mean, I wouldn't know in the moment whether a cop had the right to search me or not in every situation, even though I know the law. I would say even if a cop is like, let me search you, or I'm gonna search you, either, staying silent is like kind of fine. Being like, oh, okay, bad, very bad. Something like, I'm gonna search you, saying, I don't want you to search me. I don't consent to that. Again, it may not stop them, but that you should never give like an explicit yes or okay or fine or anything like that, even if they're asserting they have a right to do it.
Kind of sounds like I do not consent is just like,
Yeah.
Some
across the board.
catchphrases,
Yeah.
Some catchphrases would be helpful.
I need
Yeah,
a
I
lawyer.
mean, right. I'm not going to say anything is another sort of really easy blanket phrase. Once you invoke your right, that's invoking your right to silence. And once you say, I'm not going to answer any further questions, they shouldn't keep asking you questions. If they do, that's something for your lawyer to argue over. I would argue anything that happens after my client asserts the right to silence can't come in, is not part of the case, has to get thrown out. That's what you're doing every time you assert a right, is you're not making the cop do or not do something that you want them to do, because that's not going to work. What you're doing is protecting yourself and giving your lawyer things to argue over later.
That makes sense.
And sometimes you have a cop who's like, can I search you? And you're like, no. And they're like, okay, but your participants, our clients are often not in those situations.
Does anybody have any other questions?
I'm just gonna drop my email in the chat. Happy to answer questions. Legal Rights Center is really invested in, being in relationship with organizations like yours in our community that are really on the ground doing the work with participants and, the folks that we represent. Happy to, be a resource for legal questions if you have other things come up. And also if you have people who are in need of legal representation, be sure to reach out as well.
I do have one last question. If we, for example, this is thinking on the top of my head. If in our, for example, any of our programs, if we were to offer to our patients or clients, a workshop to talk to them about some of the stuff, would that be a service that you would provide?
Yeah.
Like in the dosing clinic, I'm thinking.
Learning days.
It's just as a part of regular programming for example, either in our intensive outpatient treatment program or within our MAT program.
It might not be me, it might be another member of our team, but certainly that's something we can do. And we have folks who also just kind of do a general know your rights, which is a little bit more what we've been talking about at the end here about your right to silence, your right to an attorney, your,
Right.
not consenting to searches. We have community ed staff who go out and do that kind of stuff all the time. So
Oh, cool. Okay.
Oh,
Sounds
love
awesome.
that.
We make some just
Robbie,
say
I'm
no
wondering
t-shirts.
if I can, oh,
Just say
sorry.
no.
Double talking here. I wanted to know if I can maybe go ahead and forward. Gavin is doing a grand rounds tomorrow and it's available via Zoom. Dr. Bart, and for those of you who don't know, he's the director for addiction medicine at Hennepin Healthcare. We just recently attended the NIDA Clinical Trials Network meeting in DC, and they were kind of bringing up the issues around xylazine and sort of, so the strips are available, but then what? Because the dangers behind overusing naloxone with xylazine and some of the symptoms that have been noticed. But it's tomorrow and the objectives are to discuss the basics, who, what, where, why, and when of fentanyl and xylazine, describe some of the harms of fentanyl and xylazine, and then identify how to reduce some of the harms of fentanyl. But he's giving a grand rounds tomorrow. If you guys are interested, I'll send it your way. I can't hear you.
That would be great. Is it being recorded? Because some of us have patients. Great.
Thank you. Well, I'll make sure to send out Anna's contact information to everybody in the slides and any other resources that we can get together. Yeah, if no one has any other final questions or comments, I think we can wrap up a little early. Thank you, Anna, for being here.
well, I appreciate the invitation. I look forward to working together.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Just a reminder, our next ECHO is May 17th with Brianna Matrius. We'll be talking about her Healing Through History programming at the U of M. Hope everyone has a good day. Thank you.
I'm actually wearing a DARE shirt.
Get off.
Dare to resist.
Oh, and is that actually